day or night. X is for exotics. And I got a question about a very common topic that comes up a lot in the reptile community in particular, and that is about inhumanely keeping exotic pets. Now, what I'm going to talk about in this video is a direct response to a question or a comment that I got on one of my videos. It was regarding leopard geckos. And this is an old video. It was actually my bio bubble review, and I think I mentioned that I was going to put leopard geckos in the bio bubble. If you haven't seen the bio bubble, I'll put a link in the description of my review of it. It's kind of hard to explain what a bio bubble is, but if you want to know what it is, it's just a cage, a very odd shaped enclosure. It's kind of equivalent to a 10-gallon tank. It might be a little bit smaller, but I'll put a link in the description below, and as well as a visual description, I'll show you this right here. This is a bio bubble, and this particular person thought that keeping leopard geckos in particular was inhumane as far as keeping it in this particular enclosure. Now, I don't know if this particular person actually was just pissed off about the very thought of having leopard geckos put in this enclosure, or initially I thought this, or she was just basically saying that keeping any animal, reptile, in any enclosure that size was inhumane. So as I responded back and forth with her briefly, I came to the conclusion that she kind of thought that all animals kept in cages that small, quote unquote, was inhumane. And my response to her was a very simple one, to try to get her to understand my point of view about it. And anybody who owns snakes, any reptile in particular, but in my case, snakes, lizards, tarantulas, you only have so much space. You only have so much you can do with your collection as far as making them feel like they have the biggest space possible. And what I was trying to explain to this person who had this question was that, unlike cats and dogs, these animals need to be kept, in particular, first and foremost, in particular, they need to be kept safe and sound, and if they're happy, that's your setup. So what I was trying to get this person, and she was a female, what I was trying to get her to understand was that when you're keeping animals like this, keeping them in that type of enclosure was actually beneficial for the animal. It wasn't beneficial for me to put one leopard gecko in a 80-gallon tank. It doesn't need that much space. Now, for somebody who doesn't understand that, to them, that's crazy. They cannot understand, why wouldn't you want to give them more space? As a human being, we kind of think in our brains, and this is just my thought, this is my humble opinion, the way I view this. As human beings, we kind of feel like we have all this open space. Now, you think about this for 1 second. We've been to the moon. We have rovers on Mars. We have probes that have gone out of the solar system. But how many of us has even really left our hometowns? A lot of us haven't. A lot of us never been out of the state. We haven't seen the whole country. We haven't been out. We haven't been out of the country. So just think about that. How confined are you? Where do you spend most of your time? In a house. Now, relative to your size, to your house, is that really that much bigger than what we give our snakes? It really isn't that much bigger. An average day for somebody, you wake up in your house, you walk out of your house, you get in a car, teeny tiny car, you go to a place of work, you're there, enclosed, you leave work, you get back in your car, you drive back home, and you get back in your house. You may go out to eat. You're inside of something. You go out to see a movie. You're inside of something. You go to someone else's house. You're inside of their enclosure, quote unquote. You see where I'm going with this? As human beings, we actually don't have as much space as you think. Even if you take a plane ride, what are you doing? You're confined. I don't know where we come up with this concept that we're supposed to be so much, that we have all this open space, we have all this freedom. No, we don't. We don't have any more space than any animal on this planet. We all share the same space. To add to that point, let's talk about other things that are relative. Your dog or a cat. Is it inhumane to teach a dog tricks for your pleasure? Does it benefit the dog to learn how to beg for food? Does it benefit a dog for you to put a leash on its throat and walk it down the street? If you never existed, would the dog be happier or unhappier? No. How you gauge that is the dog happy? So if the dog enjoys his walk with a leash around his neck, there's nothing wrong with it. If a dog is pissed off and he's fighting and biting back while you're walking it, you might stop and say, okay, maybe this dog doesn't like this, right? But that's really that there's no difference between that dog not wanting to be walked and a dog wanting to be walked versus a leopard gecko or a lizard or a snake. If the animal's comfortable, you can tell. We can tell in the reptile community, if you know your animal enough, you can tell when the animal is distressed. If the enclosure is too small, they will let you know. They'll stop eating. They'll have erratic behavior. They'll bite. They'll run. There's a whole host of things. Humidity can be wrong. Temperatures can be wrong. Ambient room temperature could be wrong. Diet could be wrong. Lighting could be wrong. I mean, there's so many things that can be wrong. That animal is going to let you know very quick if it's not right. If that animal is happy and healthy, you're going to get that animal out in your hand. And that animal is going to tell you with its body language and the way it moves around in your hand, and the way they move in their enclosure, the way they eat, the way they sleep. They're going to give you signs that says, I'm fine with this. This is perfectly okay. Just because an animal could live in the wild does not mean that they're unhappy in captivity. There's no different than a dog. If you took your dog and release it, chances are it probably wouldn't survive very long. If it did, it'd get picked up, it'd get taken to a shelter or whatever. But the point is that the animal has no contrast. It doesn't know what it doesn't know. So it's not like you're picking up an animal from the wild and then thrusting it inside of a little small cage. That's not what we're doing here. These are captive bred animals most of us are keeping. We're not going out in the wild and grabbing wild animals that have been living for 30 years outside and then tossing them inside of a look at. These animals have no contrast. They have no idea that there's out there. They have no idea about that. Other people might say, well, that's no excuse. That's not a good enough excuse not to keep them in these enclosures. But just think about this. Let's take this a step further. If you've ever been to a zoo, I'm from St. Louis. We have a fucking polar bear here. Just think about that for a second. We have a polar bear here at the St. Louis Zoo. A polar bear. Now, I'm just picking this one polar bear out. Now, obviously, we have a lot of other animals here that does it. But every time I see the polar bear, I'm like, we have a fucking polar bear here. And I don't think that polar bear is having a blast in that enclosure. That polar bear is enjoying itself. That polar bear is healthy, happy, and content. Not because it's not living in the Arctic. You know, it's not because they're feeding it extra. It's happy because its confines is perfect for that animal. It's happy. It's healthy. It's feeding. People care for it. It's not feeling in danger. It's not stressed out. There's nothing for that animal to fear. Therefore, obviously, the St. Louis Zoo enclosure for that polar bear is not, a wide, vast, Arctic terrain. It's just an enclosure, and this polar bear is out in blazing hot humidity and thriving. Now, why is that? Because it's well cared for. And that's how we do with our animals. Anybody who's owned an exotic pet knows that care for that animal is going to by far exceed any conditions you're going to have as far as caging and lighting and heating. If you love that animal, you're going to figure it out for that particular animal to be healthy. But for this person who left me the comment, trust me, these animals are not neglected by being in small enclosures. They're optimal for their survival. They're set up for their survival, and they're kept. Now, everybody knows there are people out there who breaks the rules and they put them in something way too small or way too big. But for the most part, most of us, if they really care about the animals, they are set up right. And if you can take a really tiny enclosure and that animal will be fine. Now, I keep my leopard geckos, most of them in 10-gallon tanks. The smaller ones, the babies, are in tubs. They're happy. They're eating. They're fine. The adults, they're breeding, they're reproducing, they're fine. There's nothing inhumane about it. And there's a whole bunch of other examples I can give about all types of animals. Again, zoos, dogs and cats, fish. Do you honestly think a fish is neglected because it lives in a fish bowl or a 20-gallon tank? They come from oceans, lakes, streams, ponds. I mean, you could talk about it. I mean, there's no way you could look at a fish and think in your brain that animal, that fish has been neglected because it's inside of a 20-gallon tank versus the ocean. Is that animal thriving? Does that animal have any contrast? And are you doing the best you can to understand that animal to make sure that you know that your setup is working for that particular animal? And if they're not complaining, who are we to complain? And if we're not complaining about your dog and cats, who are you to complain about our exotic pets? Knowledge is the key. You don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, that makes it difficult for you to understand what we're doing. But believe us, trust in us, we know what we're doing. We would never neglect these animals. Again, there are exceptions. There are people out there who don't care. But for the most of us do. So I hope that explains a little bit for you. I appreciate your comments, and I had fun making this video for you. And I'll hopefully, all of you out there, if you ever hear this, share this video and talk about it more, because a lot of people don't understand. They do need to talk about it more. And I'll see you on the next episode. Be you and be genuine always. Take care. See you next time. Be safe.